Okay, so I just did the first batch of these Ask Me Anything questions, and the conclusion I've come to after having done a lot of these videos now is I hate it. I absolutely hate it, and I'm not going to do it anymore. Answering the questions is not enjoyable, and it's also, I don't think it's something I'm really that good at. And when I say this is, I'm not fishing for compliments. This is just an explanation of why I'm not going to do this again. The problem is that when you talk off the top of your head, for me, that's very difficult under even the best of circumstances. I forget stuff very easily. If I'm going to talk about something, I have to go back and read a little bit about it to remind myself of, what I think or what I should think or something. Anyway, that's what I do. I go, so before I do any kind of video or before I talk about any topic to anybody, I just go and do a little bit of reading, just to remind myself of it. With these questions, I can't do that. I have to talk off the top of my head and I just forget everything. And then even worse, it's like different topics every question. So there's like 100 different topics I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about like ethics 1 minute and then philosophy of science the next minute. But then if my mind is in ethics mode, it's very, how do you switch gears to philosophy of science mode? It's hard to do that quickly and then from one topic to the next. So for these reasons, I don't think I'm going to do this anymore. And with that said, let's just plow through these final questions. And, I'm sorry, I know some people enjoy these videos. People have said to me explicitly that they do, so I apologize for that, but I just can't take this anymore. This is horrible. So, here we go. Lindo90. My first question is, as a vegetarian, when was the last time you ate meat? Do you have any advice to motivate someone to cut meat out of their diet? Well, the thing is that, I don't really claim to be a vegetarian with respect to diet. I don't think what you eat really matters, unless the reason is something to do with health, then obviously it's going to matter what you're putting in your mouth. But I don't think it matters what you put in your mouth. What matters is what you are purchasing, whether or not you are, you are giving money to the animal agriculture industry. So I don't have any issue with just consuming meat if it's meat that would otherwise be thrown away, for instance. And in fact, you say for my second question, you've mentioned your dislike for wasting food. What measures do you take in your own life to ensure that nothing goes to waste? Well, yeah, you see, if there's a conflict between, on the one hand, the inclination towards refraining from eating animal products, and then on the other hand, throwing away food, right? I'm gonna be okay. No, eat it. I'll eat it. I'm not throwing it away. I don't like wasting food, and I don't really think there's any good. Let's put it this way: I don't think there's any good case, just from the point of view of promoting animal welfare, for throwing away food. It seems. It seems in many ways counterproductive because, of course, even a plant-based diet is going to involve killing or harming animals unintentionally, right? To some degree or another, there'll be animals living on fields or whatever that end up getting accidentally killed, right? So actually, if we could try to just reduce waste and reduce our consumption, then that would be, I think, a good thing. So yeah, look, it's not like this is something that's that important to me, but I will make efforts in my own life not to throw things away. So there we go. Okay, so if you were to do porn, what would your name? Would you keep your name or come up with an alias? If so, what would it be? I do like Kane Baker, but I don't know if that's really a porn name. I would call myself Ornette Poleman, and I guess I would star in films with names like The Shape of Jizz to Come or Song XXX. Virgin Beauty, I guess, already works without any alterations. So yeah, that would be it. Ornette Poleman. All right. Mantis 0. Is it possible for there to be creatures with different logical systems, like with 37 truth values instead of 2? We already have different logical systems, and there already are logics with more than 2 truth values. I imagine any logical system with 37 truth values would be extraordinarily complex. So that's probably why we wouldn't use that. But no, these already exist. So if you if you have some background already in formal logic, then an excellent introduction is Graham Priest's Introduction to Non-Classical Logics. Uh, but yeah, there's multiple different formal logical systems, so it's not just possible for there to be creatures with different logical systems. You only have to look at human beings, and you can find different logical systems there. Okay then, Max says, what kind of facts, if any, could shake your commitments to your broadly empirical stance? Could the empirical stance somehow be shown to be false, or are stances designed to avoid such questioning? First of all, I don't really know if I would really call myself an empiricist these days. Well, I guess I am in some sense, but you know, I mean, I can play the role of the empiricist if you really want. But no, I mean, really the whole point of framing things in terms of stances is that they're not the sorts of things that are just going to be refuted by presenting certain facts. Now, when we look at the history of empiricism and the way that empiricism has sometimes been conceived, these sort of traditional conceptions of empiricism are such that they would be refuted by just, you know, by facts. So if you are a, say, concept empiricist, then it looks like that could be refuted by the relevant claims about how psychology works, right? Like maybe we just do come with a certain set of concepts or something furnished in our minds from birth, and then it looks like concept empiricism is refuted. So but the whole point is that what we are able to do is we can identify certain like traditions which, you know, have kind of reshaped themselves in response to different empirical developments. You know, you can find people 2,000 years ago who were defending something like a kind of empiricist attitude, and then, you know, you can find that same sort of empiricist attitude cropping up again and again and again throughout the history of philosophy. And the whole, like, the point of talking about the empiricist stance is we're sort of trying to say, okay, like, what is that, right? What is that attitude? So it's not the sort of thing that's just going to be like, I mean, look, there are going to be facts that could, I suppose, shake the commitment. I mean, but it wouldn't really be something that would just be refuted. So I think the thing is that here's, as I see it, how it would work, right? What the empiricist, if you adopt an empiricist stance, this sort of provides a kind of orientation to your philosophical inquiries. It kind of, it sort of points you in the direction that, you know, you want to be going. And so there are certain, you know, challenges. So here's the thing, right? As I would see the empiricist stance, it's going to be something like a resistance to, you know, doing metaphysics via explanation by postulation, right? So where we try to explain the success of various discourses by postulating facts beyond experience or beyond the phenomena of which those discourses provide true descriptions. And so, you know, that's one very important element of an empiricist stance. And then, of course, this is going to raise a question about, well, how from within that sort of framework do you understand things like the success of science or the success of mathematics? You know, like what's going on in these cases. And so these are the challenges for empiricists, right, is to come up with some sort of alternative account, or or at least just to kind of defend the, or at least to, you know, object to the more metaphysically robust accounts in these cases, and that might fail, right? I mean, it might just be that it turns out that the challenges for, say, an empiricist account of mathematics are so great that the empiricist stance starts to look like a stance that nobody really wants to take up. You know, it looks like it might just start to look like, no, the challenges here are the mountain is too high to climb. That's the sort of thing. But I mean, you know, it wouldn't necessarily be a refutation. It would just be that, okay, you know, the weight of the philosophical challenges at a particular time is such that we don't want to take that option. But I think the history of philosophy is such that these sorts of broad stances never really die, right? I mean, you know, the pendulum swings one way or the other, but even philosophical positions which seem indefensible at one time can come back to prominence a bit later when people think about the arguments a bit differently. You also ask, in the sphere of metaphysics, whose work do you enjoy or think is of high quality? Why do you think so? Well, I suppose probably my favourite would be David Lewis. And you've asked me why I think so, but this is, I mean, the answer here is just going to be, you know, I think they're a good writer. I think they have very bold ideas. I think they have clever arguments. Lewis, I mean, look, I love engaging with metaphysics. Metaphysics is like, yes, I object to metaphysics, but I enjoy engaging with ideas I disagree with. And what I like is when people defend, you know, wild and bold ideas. I think that Lewis's modal realism is a pretty wild and bold idea, and he, you know, he came up with arguments for it that were very careful. I mean, I think that his whole approach was fundamentally misguided, and so I think the arguments are wrong. I don't think they're remotely convincing, but you know, it's, for me, really enjoyable to read. Also, Descartes. I absolutely love Descartes. I think that the Meditations is an absolutely stunning and really quite beautiful manifesto of a particular way of doing philosophy that I think, again, is completely misguided. But you know, it's a real joy to read that and to engage with that intellectually. So it's, you know, I mean, I suppose, look, when it comes to people within metaphysics, I tend to be quite sympathetic to them in the sense that I enjoy their work or I think it's of high quality. I just don't agree with it. Yeah, I mean, I'd say, you know, David Lewis, Descartes, Graham Priest has got some really engaging stuff on metaphysics. And you know, also people like you know, Ladyman and Ross, metaphysics, everything must go, right? Their naturalized metaphysics is very engaging as well. Okay, Mohmmadali Nahavandianpour. Sorry if I got that wrong. You ask, is positive discrimination justified? I don't even know how to begin approaching that question. That's, I mean, in what context? What kind of positive discrimination? What do we even really mean by positive discrimination? And without more details about what we're talking about, I really don't have any particular reaction to that. Can simulation theory hypothesis justify that we are 99% likely to be in a virtual world? The way this question is phrased, I mean, when you ask for it, like, can it justify it? You're asking somebody who doesn't believe that there is such a thing as justification, period, right? No argument justifies anything. So now, does the simulation argument, like, give me a 99% credence that we're in a virtual world? No, because I think that the issue is just going to be like, okay, what's our credence in some of the So I mean, the way that we would put it is something like, you know, either, and this is how David Chalmers puts it, right? Either we are almost certainly Sims, right? We're almost certainly in a simulated world. Or simulating minds is just impossible, or for some reason, or there are sim blockers such that, you know, simulating minds is impossible or infeasible, or for some reason non-sims just choose not to create sims, right? That's the way Chalmers puts it. It's like, okay, you've got these three options, right? Either we're very likely to be Sims because, you know, the vast majority of conscious beings like us are Sims, or it's going to turn out that for some reason it's infeasible to create Sims, or it is feasible to create Sims, but it just so happens that non-Sims choose not to create Sims, right? So that's the way Chalmers puts the argument. And then the question is just going to be, well, you know, what's our credence in these other options? Now, I can't really see why we would. I mean, I would have thought that if it is feasible to create Sims, if that is within, you know, our technological grasp, then it's probably going to happen. So I would put my inclinations are quite low. I just think, you know, technology goes wherever it can, right? I mean, if it can do something, it probably will. And in the case of, like, creating Sims, it's not as though this is just. I mean, look, we've created things like nuclear bombs, things with incredible destructive capacities. So why the hell wouldn't we? Sims it seems relative. They're nothing compared to that, right? They're not really a big deal compared to something like that. So yeah, why wouldn't we create it? So anyway, I have a relatively low credence in the idea that non-sims, at least non-sims like us, would not create sims. But with respect to the sim blockers that would perhaps make sims infeasible, well, I'm just not so sure. So is it possible for simulated beings to be conscious? I would be inclined to say yes, but I'm only inclined to say yes. I'm not like 99% certain that the answer is yes. So I don't know, right? Like my inclination is, yeah, probably you can probably, like, if it was a sophisticated enough simulation, you could probably have consciousness there. But look, maybe consciousness is dependent on having a particular type of biological substrate or something like that. Maybe consciousness requires the sort of, wet, gooey matter that you have in a biological brain for some reason. Again, I don't think that that's true, but I just don't know. I don't know how I would rule that out with, like more than 99% certainty. Or maybe, maybe it's the case that, civilizations just tend to die out before they develop the sort of technology that would be sophisticated enough to run these simulations. I don't have a very optimistic view of the future in this respect, at least for our civilization. Of course, we're only one civilization. Maybe there are other civilizations that would do things better. But I mean, I don't know. Maybe there just is some reason why. I guess here's the thing, right? Is if there's some sort of technology which is such that it is highly destructive, and which is such that it can then be available relatively widely, then it seems like it's going to be very likely that the civilization will then destroy itself via that technology. And one of the problems of technological progress is that it makes sort of everything kind of cheaper and easier. And so think about, for instance, it seems like over time it might well become possible that, like, people, that sort of any group with relatively limited resources could, design a sort of powerful bioweapon or something in a lab, design a powerful virus and release it. I mean, at the moment, that doesn't seem to be within the capacity of, of anything other than, like, very well-funded government projects. But, like, who knows what things will look like in 10 years, 20 years. So, it may well be that technology, just as it develops, ends up creating existential risks, and then societies like burn themselves out before they're able to start running simulations. Maybe. Again, I don't know how I would rule that out with greater than 99% certainty. So I think the answer is, I do not have a credence of over 99% that this is a simulation. Momentum. What philosophical concepts would you consider gibberish or unintelligible? It's very, very hard to say, because I have a very liberal view of conceivability. I mean, so the real question here is, well, under what circumstances does something count as unintelligible? And actually, I think that intelligibility is relatively easy to get. So here's my theory of conceivability, right? I would say that something P, right? P is conceivable just in case I understand the words that are used in stating P, and I'm able to tell a story about P. I'm able to draw further inferences from P. I'm able to, work out, like, what follows from P. And then I can kind of converse with other people about P in such a way that they say that they understand what I'm saying, right? I think as long as those three conditions are in place, I think, okay, that counts as, like, conceiving of what P is. And so, I mean, the thing is, like, for any concept that has gained a wide use in philosophy, that's going to pass that bar. So there's a sort of, there's the sort of first hurdle there, right? Like, so for any concept that has wide currency, I mean, not just in philosophy, but in any sort of tradition, it's going to be the case that like people understand the words that are used in stating the concept, and people are able to like draw further inferences from the concept. They're able to make arguments using the concept, make arguments against the concept, and so on. And so that's just going to come out as being like, okay, well, that's conceivable then. So with that said, there's going to be relatively few, if any, examples of things that count as unintelligible. Now, I do think that there are positions that are, I might say, objectionably vague. And I suppose, a good example of this would perhaps be something like physicalism, right? If I say, well, what exactly is a physical property, right? How are we defining that? And then there's different approaches one can have to this question. You get something like Hempel's dilemma, where it's, well, we can define physical properties in terms of current science, but then we're going to say that physicalism is false because we think that current science is not perfectly accurate, right? There are going to be developments in the future. So if what it is to be a physical property is defined in terms of the content of current science, then physicalism probably is going to be false. On the other hand, if we define what a physical property is in terms of ideal science, well, that doesn't really tell us much, because we don't know what the content of ideal science is going to be. We won't know until we've got there, right? If we say, well, physicalism is the view that all that exists is whatever is postulated at the end of science. Well, we aren't at the end of science yet, so yeah, that's not much use. So that sort of thing is a problem, and so maybe we would want to say that physicalism is therefore like gibberish or unintelligible. That seems a little bit unfair, though. I don't think that's the issue. I mean, the very fact that I'm able to present a dilemma like this would suggest to me that the position I'm talking about is not just unintelligible. If a position was unintelligible, then I feel like I wouldn't be able to say anything about it. I wouldn't be able to, like, what I'm really saying is, well, the position is kind of vague in the sense that it could mean, like, okay, there's these two different things it could mean, and each of those things has problems, so here's a dilemma. That's not to say it's unintelligible, though. So yeah, I think that if we use the term in like some very broad sense, where like even identifying vagueness or whatever is enough to count, then maybe there are positions that are unintelligible. But as I would see it, I'm quite liberal about what counts as conceivability and intelligibility, and therefore it's very rare that philosophical concepts are unintelligible. What philosophical positions do you consider extremely defensible but are widely rejected? Well, I guess it would just be relativism about truth. I mean, my favourite position, the position that I I suppose if there's any one position I'm most associated with, I guess it would be that one by now. And relativism is something that the vast majority of philosophers reject out of hand. They just dismiss it. It's a word that scares them. It seems to me that the standard objections to relativism are extremely poor. It's easy to respond to them. And moreover, it seems to me that there are lots of positions that philosophers take very seriously, which actually are quite... I don't want to say that they entail relativism, but they're, like relativism seems to follow quite easily from them, given certain other plausible assumptions. So I've made a video called Relativism and Truth, in which I argue that that all of the standard truth theories are very easily compatible with relativism about truth. That, again, I'm not saying they entail truth, but it's like if you take something like correspondence theory and then you consider certain other plausible assumptions, you just get relativism very easily. Same with deflationism, same with pragmatism, same with coherence theory. So philosophers should stop being so scared of relativism. How would you cash out what metaphysical possibility is? Well, you're asking the wrong person here, because I don't really buy into the idea that there is metaphysical possibility, at least in the sense that I think many philosophers want to talk about it. I mean, so if you were to ask me to give the sort of standard account of this, what would be the? I mean, like I think trying to give a definition of metaphysical possibility is tricky, but you can kind of illustrate what we're talking about. So, metaphysical possibility is more restricted than logical possibility. I mean, there's different grades of possibility, right? So, a contradiction like P and not P, you might say, well, that's ruled out as a matter of logical possibility. Okay, then there's what's possible within the scope of physical law. So nothing can exceed the speed of light, right? In our universe, nothing can accelerate beyond the speed of light. So that's ruled out just as a matter of physical law. That's nomologically impossible. It's nomologically possible to to travel within the speed of light. It's nomologically impossible to accelerate beyond the speed of light. But we want to say, well, acceleration beyond the speed of light is not a logical contradiction. And it kind of seems like, if the physical laws had been different, then maybe we could accelerate beyond the speed of light. And, surely there's some sense in which the physical laws could have been different. I mean, hey, maybe the world was made by God and God could have set the laws differently, right? You don't have to believe in God, obviously, right? Maybe the universe just popped into existence in the Big Bang, and hey, maybe if the physical constants could have been different, the physical laws could have been different, and then maybe you could get acceleration beyond the speed of light. Now, what we're dealing with when we say these sorts of things, we're now within the realm of metaphysical possibility. So this is what it's supposed to be, right? Is it's possibility, like not in the sort of absolutely broadest sense. Here's an example of. I mean, the question is, I suppose, is whether there's like a restriction on metaphysical possibility, because obviously acceleration beyond the speed of light is logically possible as well. So what's metaphysically possible but logically impossible? Or rather, what's metaphysically impossible but logically possible? Right? We want to show that logical possibility is broader than metaphysical possibility. Well, I mean, this is where things get a little bit tricky. So, I mean, one example that's sometimes given is things like, I could not have been a donkey, or I could not have been the number 3. It's metaphysically impossible for me to have been the number 3. But it's not logically impossible, right? It doesn't seem as though... So in the case of logical possibility, we're saying that this is ruled out just in virtue of like the form of the statement. Again, this is the standard view. The standard view would be, well, when we're dealing with logical possibility, we can sort of just look at the form of the proposition, and that's enough. So P and not P. It doesn't matter what P is. It doesn't matter what the content is. P and not P, that can't be the case regardless of what you plug in for P. But when I say something like, I could have been the number 3, or rather, I could not have been the number 3, well, that does depend on the content of what I'm saying, right? I could not have been the number 3. I could not have been a research chemist. Well, no, I could have been a research chemist, right? So it matters whether we're talking about the number 3 or whether we're talking about being a chemist. So yeah, I could have been the number 3. Maybe that's something that's an example of a metaphysical impossibility. Now, of course, from my point of view, I find this a little bit. All of the standard examples of metaphysical possibility, I think, are very questionable. In this particular case, I would just say, well, I'm not the number 3. I'm not really sure what else, what exactly is it that makes it the case that I could not have been the number 3? Like, why? Why not? I mean, now there's a way of elaborating that where, we would maybe just start talking about, say, the definitions of terms or something, but then it looks like we might be in the realm of like, okay, it's ruled out in virtue of meaning rather than in virtue of like the way the world is. But anyway, that's the idea of metaphysical possibility. As I said, my own view is I'm very skeptical that there is metaphysical possibility. So, but that would be how I would try to explain it. Okay. some philosophers think there's parity between affirming transgenderism and affirming transracialism. Do you think it's possible for you to change your race? Well, I suppose I don't really have any strong feeling about the transracialism thing. It seems like this just isn't something that most people do. Well, not most people. This isn't something that where there's like a lot of people for whom, you know, not changing their race or not being recognised as a different race would cause significant, you know, psychological distress just in virtue of being classed as a particular race. So, of course, there are a few cases of people who claim to have been who claim to be a different race than they are. But I just don't. Yeah, I don't really have any particular view of that. Let me think about this because I do have more to say. I'm just getting a mental block. This is an example of what I talked about when at the beginning of this video I said I hate this. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it because I was just talking about metaphysical possibility. And I was just thinking about, you know, laws of nature. Now I've got to think about this entirely different topic. It's unbearable. So I have things that I have thought about this before, and there's a reason. So I think that there is not quite a parity between these cases. There's a reason why I think that. Let's see if I can force the reason from the mental sludge. Let's see if I can get it out. What's the reason why there's no parity? I'm not editing this out. I'm keeping this in. I have to suffer. You have to suffer with me. There's a reason why there's no parity. There's two ways I feel about this. First of all, I feel there is not a parity between these cases. Secondly, I still don't have a problem with transracialism, right? So why is there no parity between these cases? Nothing's coming to me. I saw your question, and you know, I had an answer at the time. Okay, let's think this through. I know that I feel like there's not a parity, and there's a specific reason why there's not a parity. Okay, and I'm going to sit here until I remember what it is. Why did I think that there wasn't? I think maybe it had something to do with the fact that... Oh God, was that it? That's so obvious though. And it's something I've already said earlier in the previous video. So, is it just that I can easily imagine a world without race, but it's very difficult to imagine a world without gender, because in the case of gender, gender is like the social manifestation of a biological distinction, where that biological distinction sort of almost inevitably is going to be invested with a great deal of social importance, namely the fact that, you know, like, okay, you have males and females are the ones who give birth to children. That sort of distinction is just inevitably going to be of social importance. And so, you know, it's hard to imagine like eliminating gender, whereas we could very easily eliminate race, and then that makes me feel like maybe it would be better to sort of favour... I mean, that's not to say we want to be sort of, you know, race blind. That can cause problems, because in fact racial distinctions, I mean, whether we like it or not, humans have decided to draw racial distinctions, and then there is discrimination as a result of that. But we don't want to necessarily, what I wouldn't want to do is to be sort of encouraging like identification with races. Maybe that's it. I'm not really sure. But as I said, that's one way that I feel about it, is that for some reason I had the feeling that there is a reason why there's no parity here. But even though there's no parity, I still actually just don't have a problem with people, transitioning, as it were, from one race to another. When the story about Rachel Dolezal came out, I just sort of shrugged. I was like, yeah, that seems fine to me. What's the big deal? Who cares? Because race doesn't matter to me. So, again, it matters insofar as it's something which has led to discrimination and so on. But in itself, it doesn't matter. So I don't mind if somebody claims to be a different race. It's fine. All right, well, I'm going to move on from that question. And, I know that wasn't a very good answer to listen to, but I assure you that however unpleasant it was for you, it was a lot more unpleasant for me. So, Mr. Noodle 15, have you ever disagreed with a philosopher so much it makes you angry? No, I don't think so. It's difficult to make me angry when I'm just reading something. I'll usually just stop reading if it's that bad. But actually, I don't really... That's not the sort of situation in which I would get angry. I don't really get angry that much. Well, I don't know. I do get irritable sometimes. I know that you've talked about forgetting much of the philosophy you've ever read. Does that make you want to stop reading philosophy? No, it doesn't have any influence on it. I just have a drive to read philosophy, and that's that. I can't help it. It's not really something I think about. I just do it. And the fact that I've forgotten almost everything else doesn't matter, because right now I want to read this topic. That's it. That's as far as my thought extends. It's like, at this moment, I'm interested in this topic, so I'm going to read about it. And then, I know that in the future I'm going to forget pretty much everything I read about this topic, but that's the future. It doesn't matter, right? Right now, this is what I'm interested in, so this is what I'm going to do. How many hours a day did you read in grad school versus now that you've graduated? I have no idea. I don't know. I didn't keep track of it. I read a lot. I did a lot of reading, and I still do. So there's no point even trying to quantify that. Nickolas Hessler, in what ways do you hope or anticipate that the philosophical practices of academia will change in the future, generally speaking? I honestly could not care less, because I'm not really involved in academia anymore. And so and you know what, even when I was involved in academia, I couldn't really care less. Philosophical fashions, they change, right? There's trends, there's fads. But I think that, you see, my view on this is that, there's not really much in the way of like philosophical progress, in the sense of the sort of progress that you get in science, where, you get people like converging on a particular theory, and then that gets sort of settled, and then you move on and you sort of build on it, and then what that can happen sort of in the short term, so over the space of a few decades you might get like a whole bunch of philosophers who agree on, say, the verification principle, and then they build on it, but it erodes, right? Nothing ever really, in the long run, everything is impermanent. That's probably true in science as well, actually. But science certainly seems to be... science seems to have greater capacity for kind of convergence and agreement. You don't get that in philosophy. So it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what ways... Like, okay, maybe right now philosophers tend to, be physicalists and naturalists, and maybe that's going to change. Maybe, panpsychism is going to get a resurgence or something. There's going to be a bunch of idealists, maybe that will take philosophers' interests for the next few decades, and then it will change into something else. The pendulum swings one way and it swings another, right? So I'm not really worried about the practices. We just sort of go round and round in circles for thousands of years and never really get anywhere. And I'm happy with that. I suppose things. So what might be a more significant change would be a change in the in the institutional structure, right? Like will academic philosophy, as it's currently practiced, will that remain? And I don't see any reason to suppose that it will. It's not obvious to me that like universities, as they currently exist, are going to remain the same. it's worth bearing in mind. It was pointed out to me by some YouTube commenter. I can't remember what it was exactly they said. It was something like, if you look at literally every famous philosopher from, I think it was something like Occam to Kant, like every philosopher in between those two, literally none of them, none of the big famous names were employed as like university professors. I mean, they went to university, and maybe some of them did like a little bit of work, but that was not their main means of employment. So, you know, look at Descartes, look at Hume, look at Locke, look at Leibniz, Spinoza, I guess. Like none of them were professors at university. So clearly the tradition of philosophy is not something that sort of has to be tied to the institution of academia in the way that it seems to be today. And I mean, it's not obvious that it's a good thing for it to be tied to it in that way. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that will change, but I'm not sure about how the content will change. Okay, Nikolaj-K says, how do you see humanity and technology evolve besides each other by 2030, 40, 50? How will the typical human health situation look, both physical and psychological? I don't know. I mean, why would I know? I'm not optimistic about things, but I really don't know. I guess okay, what will humanity and technology look like in the future? I don't know. Man. Okay. I can't be bothered to answer this question. I'm stopping this. I'm going to stop and take a break. Okay, look, I decided not to take a break. Here's the thing. I know that at some point in previous Ask Me Anythings, I've said something about my somewhat pessimistic view about where things are going. I just... but the thing is, I have no idea, right? I'm just guessing, really. But I'm pessimistic because it just seems like there's a whole bunch of problems that are all sort of converging at the same time, and it doesn't really look like we're doing much about any of those problems. I'm thinking of things like climate change and resource depletion, topsoil depletion, ocean acidification, all of this. That looks bad, right? And then I look at so the impact of technology has. There are so many things that are wonderful about technology. It's true. I mean, the very fact that I'm able to do this and make this video and do this YouTube thing is a good example of that. But the trouble is that it's, when I think about things like I don't know, the incredible power, the sort of increasing powers of things like AI, right, and the increasing powers of kind of big data and the ability to sort of use methods of like targeted advertising and misinformation and so on. It seems like what's happening is that as this kind of technology gets more and more powerful, the capacities for somewhat insidious forms of propaganda are just greater and greater and greater. And I don't really know, I mean, I have no idea. I haven't looked into this enough to have any idea about how you resist that. So that's kind of scary. The other thing that's kind of scary is the fact that AI seems to be kind of taking over the stuff that I would have thought is like good. I feel like when we thought about technological development in previous years, in previous decades, the idea is that we would use technology to sort of liberate ourselves. We'd use technology to take over the, just the grinding manual labor, and you sort of put robots, automated checkouts in supermarkets and things like that. So, in other words, like the the sort of necessary stuff, the stuff you have to do in order to live, that's taken over by the robots, right? And then that just frees us to engage in like art and intellectual pursuits and all of that. Whereas what's actually happening is it turns out that no, technology is just really rubbish at the like. Check out. I think there's a lot of supermarkets, for instance, where they've decided to stop using the self-checkout machines because they keep breaking. They're not actually very efficient at that. And it often ends up being the case that you have to employ people to stand around and check the machines anyway. So you might as well just have people doing the checkouts, right? So it turns out that the machines aren't really very good at that stuff. But what they are apparently quite good at is producing art and producing poetry and things like that. Now, of course, at the moment, I mean, look. You can identify it, right? I mean, and it's very easy to sort of. I think the thing is, when you look at like the products of AI art, it's very easy to be critical of it, but it's like, well, it's only early days, give it another. I mean, I do know that like my experience with the Chat GPT, I tried to get it to produce. I remember trying to get it to produce poetry in the style of E. Cummings, and it just kept failing and failing. And in fact, it wasn't able to produce a poem that didn't rhyme. That was kind of funny. I kept trying to get it to make a poem that didn't rhyme, and it just kept giving me rhymes. No matter how I asked it, I kept getting rhymes. So okay, it's rubbish at the moment, but it's very early days, and I feel like it's not going to take much longer before we can get something that can do the sort of thing that E. Cummings was doing. Because like right now we're at the point where this stuff is in a flash. This can produce a poem much better than anything I could write, and it can produce art much better than anything I could create. So it's that's kind of depressing to me. But I guess there you go. Those are some thoughts about the future. There's sort of two paths, right? There's the path of, well, everything just starts to fall apart and living standards degrade because of the impact of because we're sort of undermining the very conditions that make civilization possible. I guess that's one path. The other path is, well, we civilization continues, technology continues developing, and then as a result, we just end up in this sort of techno dystopia where there is enormous power invested in a relatively small group of people who are able to they have absolutely unprecedented means of control, and where all of the sort of artistic and intellectual pursuits just become taken over by the machines. I mean, it's depressing. And then of course on top of that, I mean, I just look at the way that a lot of countries are going. It's cost of living and things like that, and it just doesn't look like there's much in the way of. It doesn't seem to be much hope of solving a lot of these problems to me. I mean, I could be being too pessimistic, but nobody. I feel like no one in this country, at least, and I think the same is kind of true in America. I feel like we've kind of given up on the idea of like making things better. It seems like the best we can hope for is that like, well, maybe we're not going to just keep. Maybe society won't continue degrading at the speed it has been in the last decade or so. Like we might be able to arrest the decline a little. That's what's on offer, right? I mean, it honestly seems like nobody in the sense of the political parties is really has really got like a vision for a better future. It's a very depressing state of affairs. Okay then. Noah asks, do you think that counterfactuals are garbage? I do. They seem to imply. I'm quoting Noah here. I do. They seem to imply that things could happen some other way, which would mean rejecting and accepting causality at the same time, rejecting the state of affairs that precipitated the initial instance, and using causality to play out an alternative state of affairs. I get that they're a useful tool, maybe, but people seem to use them as a possible reality, which there is no evidence for. Thoughts? Yeah, pretty much my take on things is that what's going on when we use counterfactuals is it's just a matter of imagination, right? We're sort of telling a story. We're telling a story about how things might have happened. But if you're, I mean, if the idea is that, well, this is supposed to be, you know, it's like true in virtue of some fact in the world, then yeah, I mean, I just don't buy that. I think that there might be like very specific contexts where I would end up saying that, okay, well, this counterfactual counts as true, but for the, you know, for the vast majority of cases, I don't think there's any good. I don't think there's any fact of the matter about the truth value of the counterfactual. So when I say something like, you know, what's a counterfactual? I don't know. If I had worn a blue shirt, that would have surprised my brother. I don't know why I just chose that one. That's a terrible example, but I can't think of a better one. So, yeah. What point do I want to make here? God damn it, man. Okay. You know what? I think I'm just going to stop here. I think this is just it. I can't do this anymore. I think I could just stop, right? I could just stop here. I could just say, no, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing it. I'm stopping. That's it. It's over. I've had enough of this. I've had enough of it. This is awful. It's awful. And every time I do it, it gets worse. And this is it. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not putting myself through any more of this. I'm sorry, okay? But you know what? I have actually answered the counterfactual question in previous AMAs, so you could probably go and look at what I think of that. I mean, I've talked about it a lot before, so you know, if you want to know why I think that counterfactuals, I agree with you that counterfactuals are garbage. Well, I don't really agree that they're garbage because I think they are. You know, it's counterfactual reasoning is very useful, right? But I don't really think there's any fact of the matter about whether, you know, about counterfactuals. You know, if X had happened, then Y would have happened. I have given reasons in the past why there's no fact of the matter, and you know, it doesn't really matter that I'm not able to answer this question, and none of this, you know what, none of this really matters because they're just questions. I don't have to do this. I chose to do it, didn't I? I made the choice to do this AMA thing. I was like, ask me anything, and yet I know every single time I've done this, I have absolutely hated it, and I've got to a point where it's like, why the hell am I doing this? Why am I doing this to myself? This is a terrible experience, and there's just no need. It doesn't even, like, it's not even worth anything because it's not like I get like more views for the AMAs. In fact, they get fewer views than any of my other videos, so I don't know why I'm even bothering. So this ends here. I'm sorry to everybody else. I did have a list of questions. There were more of them, but I'm not doing this anymore. I'm stopping. Never again.